Hello, lovely listener, and welcome to the Aardvark Swift podcast. I'm Jimmy Bowers, and this time out, we're doing things a little differently. With the UK leaving the EU, hiring talent from the continent just got a little bit harder for UK studios, and actually for EU studios looking to take advantage of UK game dev talent. I have a sit down with Lawrence Keir Thomas of immigration specialist Fragomen LLP and Ian Goodall, managing director of Aardvark Swift, to discuss the rule changes, the costs, and what can be done to continue to hire effectively in 2021 and beyond.
My name's Lawrence Keir Thomas. I am a senior associate solicitor at Fragomen. Fragomen are a global immigration law firm. I myself have been practicing in immigration law for coming up 12 years now. I've done it all within that sphere. So I've worked previously with sort of asylum claimants and that side of things. But for the last 5 years, I've been focused entirely on working within business immigration. So what that means in practice is that I work with companies of all sizes, but I've got a particular specialism working with game studios to ensure that they understand and that their talent gets the correct visa to come into the UK and work here. As a result, I get to talk a lot about these issues. It's a lot of fun to keep doing that.
And same question to you, Ian.
So who am I and what do I do? So I'm Ian Goodall. I own Aardvark Swift Recruitment, which is a specialist video games recruitment agency. I also own Games Jobs Direct, which is a specialist video games job board. And then to finish off the sort of circle, I suppose I also own a not-for-profit business called Grads Engage, which helps to pipeline young talent, increase the diversity and that talent pipeline into video games as well. So I suppose all in all, just a recruitment professional within that video games sector. I've been doing that for 20 plus years now, and I've owned Aardvark for a good 15 of those. So definitely got a vested interest in helping UK studios hire talent from Europe, which is something we've been doing for many, many years, and vice versa as well, helping mainland European studios to attract talent from the UK. So that's why we've taken such an interest in this issue.
Amazing. Well, thank you for spending time with me today. So jumping straight into it then, how did studios, I mean, it might be quite a simple answer to this question, regards to there wasn't that many barriers, but how did studios prior to Brexit hire, and what was the kind of restrictions in place?
It is a good question, James, because sometimes we can lose sight of that because everything's got more complicated now. But you're absolutely right. It was more straightforward. It was much, much straightforward. So before Brexit became reality, and what I mean by that is before the 1st of January this year, because that's really when the changes took effect, EU nationals enjoyed the right of free movement. So that meant that they could come into the UK and work here for any company without any restriction. So that just meant whenever a studio was looking to hire an EU national, they did so in exactly the same way that they would go about hiring a British national. So they didn't have to worry about visas. They simply got a copy of the individual's passport, and that was enough to prove that person had the right to work. So it was a very popular route because obviously there were no associated visa costs for it. But that's how it was. There was essentially, for a studio's point of view, no restriction in how they hired an EU national.
And what's the sort of main change since then? I don't know, it's quite a broad question.
It's good to take it at a high level. So yeah, as I said, since the 1st of January this year, EU nationals arriving in the UK for the first time, there are provisions in place that we'll talk about, I know, later, of those who came before that date, but anyone who's coming from the EU for the first time since the start of this year, they don't enjoy that right of free movement anymore. So what that means is if they want to work for a UK employer, they'll need a visa that allows them to do so. And this is the first time in many, many years that EU nationals are no longer given preferential treatment over non-EU nationals within the UK's immigration system. The only exception we have now is for Irish nationals. They are given special preferential treatment separate from other nationalities because the UK and Ireland have obviously a long-standing link. That agreement in place pre-existed both countries joining the EU. So Irish nationals are deemed to be settled in the UK. So that means that for studios looking to hire, they can hire British or Irish nationals without needing to worry about a visa. But for everyone else, they're now going to have to be concerned with the individual getting a visa, and that may mean the studio having to sponsor them.
No, that completely makes sense. So obviously we'll talk about a few different ways in which this works going forward. But I know specifically if you're an EU national, if you're part of the European Economic Area, or if you're a citizen of Switzerland, you and your family can apply at the moment for EU settlement scheme to stay in the UK, but there's a deadline on that of June 30th. So could you speak a little bit more of what the EU settlement scheme is and what sort of happens after this date if you've not applied?
So yeah, it's definitely best to start with what the scheme is and how it works, and then, like you say, look at the consequences if an individual doesn't apply under the scheme. So put most simply, the scheme is part of the transitional agreement that came between the UK and the EU in the form of the withdrawal agreement. So this was the original deal. I know we've had many different deals across this process, but this was the deal that was agreed between Boris Johnson and the European Union. What it is it's a scheme that's been put in place to protect EU nationals, EEA nationals and Swiss nationals and their family members who were in the UK before the 31st of December 2020. I must say there are equivalent versions of this EU settlement scheme in the existing 27 EU member states that allow British nationals who are already living there to be able to secure their status, but they're only just coming out now. But the British scheme's been open since March 2019. So, as I say, it's a scheme that's in place to protect EU, EEA, Swiss nationals and their family members who were in the UK before the 31st of December last year, and it allows them to apply for immigration permission. What that means is if they've already been living in the UK for 5 years, they will be granted settled status, which is also known as indefinite leave to remain. And if they've been in the UK for less than 5 years, they'll get something called pre-settled status, which is valid for 5 years and basically gives them a bridge till they've finished 5 years residence in the UK, at which point they can then also themselves apply for settled status. And it's a really important scheme because what it means is that the individual then doesn't need to worry about getting a visa that permits work, worrying about being able to stay in the UK. The status is there to ensure the individuals who enjoyed the right of free movement basically can continue to stay in the UK without much restriction. From a studio's point of view, it means if you've got somebody who was in the UK before that date, you can still hire them without needing to get them a visa. It's a really important scheme that's in place. And as you've already touched on, in fact, there is a deadline for the scheme. So the deadline for applying under the scheme is the 30th of June this year. And if the individual doesn't apply before that deadline, they will find themselves facing quite a number of issues. Practically speaking, they will then find themselves, they may not be able to open a new bank account. They may find their bank account is closed. They won't be able to easily rent a new property because they won't be able to demonstrate their status in the UK. And they may also find that they have trouble accessing healthcare. So very serious consequences. The message that we give out to all of our clients and have done consistently is to encourage their staff to apply under the scheme as soon as possible.
There is no limit on that then. It's not a case of you need to have been working for a certain period of time, whether you've done a day, a week or 6 months, you're still eligible for that kind of status. Is that right, Lawrence?
Yeah, it is a very flexible scheme. I don't want to get into the absolute details of it because individual circumstances can be very different. But yeah, broadly speaking, anyone who's been in the UK for as little as a day before the 31st of December last year, they will potentially be eligible under the scheme. If they were only in the UK for a very short while and it was more than 6 months before the end of the transition, they may not be able to qualify. But for that specific requirement, it's residence alone. You don't have to be working. It's simply residence in the UK or even physical presence in the UK.
I've kind of heard about this on the Brexit grapevine as people find ways around these new rules and regulations, but it's kind of become apparent that some people have said, well, even if you've only been here on maybe on holiday or you for a week to visit, whether it's the sites of London or something like that, and if you've got proof that you were here, be that a plane ticket receipt or even if it's a cup of coffee from Costa or something like that, then that counts as residency, does it?
Yeah, it does, and it's counterintuitive, isn't it, really? If you just fancy the trip last year to London and came and you could suddenly find you have the right to live in the UK for the next 5 years, it is that simple, actually. It is possible to qualify, even if you didn't necessarily, have that intention. It is possible still to qualify under the scheme. So anyone who's not sure, obviously we always recommend just get in contact with an immigration lawyer. Could be us, could be anyone, but get in touch and see if you might be someone who could apply under the scheme.
Could be a very handy workaround, couldn't it? Because obviously as we get further into this conversation, it's going to become apparent that the costs of not having that cup of coffee receipt could be several £1,000s and lots of paperwork. So it's worth having a think into.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. It was one of the things we were encouraging is particularly if people had like assignments coming up. Some of our clients that send their staff around different parts of Europe. Perhaps there's someone had an assignment that was due in February. We said, well, literally, can you push that assignment up a bit and maybe get them to December, because then you're going to open up options for them that means it won't require this visa type.
That could have done wonders for the tourist trade last year with obviously the pandemic. It would have been great, wouldn't it? People nipping in for a weekend just to give themselves a 6-month window of relocating.
Obviously, we've spoken about the EU settlement scheme, which helps EU nationals settle in the UK. But obviously, the Brexit immigration issue for work applies both ways. So is it similar, or what's in place at the moment? I imagine it probably depends per country, but what's in place at the moment for, say, if someone from the UK wanted to work in EU studios, is the same sort of process in place that the EU workers are afforded in the UK, or does it vary?
For UK candidates looking to go to the EU before the end of this year, it was really straightforward. They could go to any of the 27 different member states of the EU and they could work there. Some of the registration formalities are a little bit different from country to country, but broadly speaking, there was, the UK national had the right to be there without having to worry about getting a work permit. Now, however, there are instead 27 different systems that they'll be subjected to. So Whereas previously, you could maybe join a studio in the Netherlands and it would be nice and straightforward, or indeed you join one in Spain. Instead, you'll find yourself that you are now subject to a system in the Netherlands or a system in Spain that is completely different from one another. So as a consequence, it's really going to depend on which country they want to go to. Full disclosure, I'm not an expert on each of those different member states' immigration systems. Thankfully, my colleagues in our Brussels and our Paris and our Zurich office are. I always send those queries to them, and their job's got infinitely harder now, having to maintain and monitor a record of what the requirements are for UK nationals. So really, it has made things a lot more complicated for UK nationals going there afresh. I think I touched on it earlier, but there is the equivalent of the EU settlement scheme in each of the 27 member states. What individuals can do in those member states is apply for what's called an Article 50 permit. That might ring a bell for some people from back in the heady days of 2017. Article 50 was the article of the Lisbon Treaty that the UK had to trigger our departure from the EU. So these Article 50 permits are available to British nationals in the other member states. But what I would say is, unlike the UK, which, to be fair, did the groundwork nice and early and put in place the EU settlement scheme from March 2019, a lot of the member states haven't really started to roll out the Article 50 process until at least last year, and there are more details coming out constantly of those different schemes. We have a handy microsite all about Brexit where you can get an idea about what the processes are, at least at a very high level. And then obviously we recommend, if you depending on which jurisdiction, give us a call and we'll talk to you about what you need to do if you're already living there in one of the EU countries. So there is some equivalence, but the picture in the EU is a complex web now of 27 different systems, plus this Article 50 permit process, which does look a little bit different in each country. But yeah, long-winded way of saying it depends.
Sounds pretty complex then. That's not something that people should, enter into thinking it's going to be an easy process then, in terms of relocating and going and living in, whether it's Paris or Madrid or Barcelona, somewhere like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense, and it's quite nice to hear that you've got obviously multiple officers globally that can help with the nitty-gritty of specific details for each member state. Sort of back to UK studios then. For studios, do all hires class as skilled workers for game development, and how does this differ for sort of support functions like HR and office staff?
It's a really good question. What we have now, in place of the system of free movement, if you've got an EU candidate for any position at the studio and they can't get status under the EU settlement scheme, and it's the first time they're coming to the UK this year, then they're going to be looking at the work visa option that's most appropriate for them and that's been designed for them. It's called the skilled worker visa. That visa type requires the applicant to score a number of points. It's why you hear the government refer to the new system as being a points-based system. They have set it up so that you have to score points to qualify for this visa. To do so, what that means is, first up, the studio, as their employer, will need to have a sponsor license. The next consideration is the role they're going to be doing at a sufficient skill level? So this is quite a big change from what we had previously. Before Brexit, if you wanted to qualify for a work visa for the UK, say you were from the US or another country outside the EU, you needed to be coming to do a role in the UK that was at what's called RQF level 6, which is broadly degree level. So you didn't have to have a degree, but you needed to be doing a job that was at degree level skills. One of the changes to this is that skill level's been dropped down now. The skill level you're looking at is now at approximately A level instead. So that does open up quite a lot of the support routes. So more roles will qualify now than previously did. So to give you an example, human resources officer, HR officer, would now potentially qualify for sponsorship under the skilled worker visa in a way that they didn't previously. And then even on the technical side, so one particular role within this sector is games testers. So games testers wouldn't previously have been able to qualify for the skilled worker visa because it wasn't at a sufficiently high level, can now qualify for a visa sponsorship. So, this is one of those few positives about this new change. So there is some additional flexibility. And also another role, IT support technicians, help desk support workers, they would now qualify for sponsorship in a way that they didn't previously. So that is a big practical change that is real and is of some benefit to studios. Just to finish off the picture about what the individual needs, so we said they need to have a sponsorship from their employer as the studio. They need to be doing a job at the right skill level, and that is likely to be the case. The other things they'll need to show that they can speak English to a sufficient level by either having a passport from a majority majority English-speaking country, Australia, New Zealand, somewhere like that, or they have a degree that was taught in English, or they pass a Home Office approved English test. So one of those three options will get them the points they need for English. And then the last thing they need to have is they need to be paid at least the required minimum salary for the job they're going to be doing. We may come on to it further in a moment, but the amount that they need to be paid depends on the type of role they're doing, how old the candidate is, and in some cases the qualifications they have. So yeah, a lot of different moving parts, but from a skill level point of view, there is some good news. Things have got a little bit better.
Yeah, I'm going to say, despite the added sort of restrictions and hoops to jump through, that's quite a nice, unexpected positive.
Is that the case for other industries as well, Lawrence, or is it just that the games industry kind of got on board with it and realised that there was going to be a big impact, or is that typical across all industries?
It's actually typical across all. So the change affects all occupations in the UK. So the skill level was always level 6. The Game Studio's already done the groundwork on that. There were some exceptions to the level 6 graduate level thing. They were for artists, graphic designers, who, a lot of them were working in game studios. So because they were the types of roles they were doing, if they were working for a game studio, they could still get sponsorship, even though technically their roles were RQF level 4. So game studios are so far ahead of the game ages ago. For them, it's just everyone else has caught up now.
Maybe that's just a sign of the desperation and the skill shift for a long period of time, even before Brexit gave us a final kick. Yes, I've got a list of questions just to run through, Lawrence, that are going to come from me rather than James. So the first one, really, I think it possibly crosses into some of the things that we talked about, but we talked about the skilled worker visa, and the question really is that are there any other? Is that the most viable and cost-effective option for studios hiring EU nationals? Or are there other ones that are worth considering? Are they on the table, or is that the main route that you think is going to be the key way forward?
It's a tough one to answer, to be honest. So the starting point is the skilled worker route has been designed by the government. They envisaged this as being the easiest way to hire an EU national, regardless of age, whether they're starting out or whether they're experienced. This is the route that they think is the best way to hire EU nationals in the UK following Brexit. And assuming that the EU national doesn't hold pre-settled status, then it is the most obvious route to do. But as we'll come on to, in terms of how cost effective it is a very expensive visa option. So for now, it's the best option. There are some developments coming on later on this year that studios need to be aware of that will potentially solve some of these problems that are caused by this. So for now, it's skilled worker, but from summer next year, you will find that if you're looking at your graduate recruitment and you're recruiting EU nationals who have graduated from UK universities, there is going to be a new graduate visa available for them, which won't require any of these costs, but will give a 2-year bridging visa for the individual to come and work for the studio without the outlay of all these costs coming in. So yeah, but for now, skilled worker is the only game in town, really.
Even that one that's coming in sort of June next year, then the graduate visa or the graduate kind of window, is that, just to clarify, that only if you've been studying in the UK, though? That's not for someone who's at a Spanish university or Dutch or Belgian university, for example?
Unfortunately, that's right. Yes, it's effectively a reinstatement of what used to be called something called the post-study work visa. If anyone's been around long enough, it's basically that being reinstated, and it's essentially to reward international students who've come to study in the UK. And obviously, there is a very significant body of EU students who are at UK institutions, because obviously students have benefited. Free movement didn't just mean the right to come and work in the UK; it meant the right to come and study here too. So EU nationals be able to come easily to study in the UK, and those who are at UK universities, as I say, those graduating from this summer will have another route opened up for them.
I suppose the next thing really that strikes me on that is that what happens to students who are, for example, EU nationals who are studying, whether it's Abertay or Staffordshire and these other places now, are they struggling then this year? Are they going to have to find some way of getting a visa or some way of being able to stay in the UK if they want to after?
It's going to depend. A lot of them will probably be okay because they will have been, especially if they're undergraduates, they'll have come to the UK before the end of last year. So that means they're going to have the right to get their pre-settled status.
They need to get on with that then. If they've got plans to stay at the end of their graduation in kind of May or June time, do they need to make sure that they've secured that status?
Absolutely, yeah. That's definitely a crucial message that candidates need to be aware of. If studios are concerned with the candidates that you work with, that's a key message for them. If they're at a UK university already, and even your postgrads, it's highly likely they'd have come before. So the current cohort are probably going to be all right. It's the cohort after that. So anyone, if you've got a postgrad who started in January this year, although perhaps that isn't a huge number, given that between pandemic and Brexit, the UK suddenly a lot less attractive to come and study in, perhaps. You've got cohorts starting, in January this year, or again, the cohort starting in autumn this year. They are definitely going to be individuals who will need to take advantage of this graduate visa route. But current cohort, they should be at least get some protection from the EU settlement scheme.
So they should be okay, but they do need to look at the paperwork now, even if I suppose some of them might think they're going to stay. They might not be certain. Obviously, nobody is when they're in the final situation. But even if they've got an inkling they might fancy working for a UK studio, then basically get yourself that settled status and use it if you need to, I suppose, is the message.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
That's good. Next question. It's a good one, this, because it's something that's cropped up quite a few times when we've been speaking to our clients. Is it possible for a UK studio, or how possible? What are the implications of if a UK studio hires an EU, say, developer and leaves them out there in Europe but working remotely? What are the kind of ins and outs of that one?
You're absolutely right. This is a question that we get a lot as well, actually, because, particularly studios were fantastic at adopting remote working from the get-go at the start of the pandemic. And, that included, onboarding new staff members from their home countries without them ever actually setting foot in the UK. So it boils down to a couple of different considerations. Me, as an immigration lawyer, I can tell you that from a UK immigration law perspective, yeah, it's absolutely possible. The UK government is not concerned about somebody having the right visa if they're not physically present in the UK. They only start to be concerned about what immigration permission somebody has when they physically step foot in the UK and start working here, albeit working in their house or their flat. If they're working at home but in the UK, then they need to have a work visa to do so. Until that happens, then no, there's no issue with that from a UK immigration law perspective. We would always say that you would want to ensure that your HR records made it clear that an individual wasn't already in the UK, so that if you were audited by the Home Office, you could say, well, look, this individual hasn't got immigration permission yet because they've not come to the UK. So from an immigration law point of view, yeah, there's absolutely no issue with doing that. The other considerations you've got to think about are from other immigration law perspectives. So making sure if, for example, the individual is not a national of the country that they're living in, so maybe you've got a Dutch national living in Germany, for example, you've got to make sure that they probably will do, but they've got to make sure they're residing lawfully in Germany. We'd always say to do that as well. So speak to our Germany team to make sure that that's done correctly as well. You've got to consider, are they a national of the country they're in? Obviously, if they're a Dutch national working in the Netherlands, it's not going to be an issue. I'm going to add a caveat because I'm a lawyer. There is an area slightly outside my own area of expertise, but one that I'm aware of from talking to other professionals is there are potential tax implications, I understand, in certain jurisdictions of having essentially, is that individual that you're employing remotely, are they inadvertently setting up a branch of you in that country? You've got to make sure you're taking the appropriate advice on having somebody employed in that country from a kind of tax perspective for the country that they're working in.
Sounds like immigration-wise you're okay, but then you're opening yourself up to a different conversation with a different lawyer about, well, can we do this and what are the implications of this from an employment contractual point of view and tax point of view?
Precisely.
Easy one then, nice easy. We'll change tack a little bit. So one of the major things here is that something that I know you and I have heard you say many times, that there's no way to sugarcoat this issue. If you're going to carry on hiring EU talent and you're a UK business, it's going to become a lot more expensive, and it is going to be a lot more expensive than it was before. So is there a way that you can maybe give us a bit of an example as to what that cost might be for a studio that thinks, well, we've got no choice. We've got to hire these people in because we know the talent shortage is very real for hiring just UK people. So can we give them a bit of an idea?
You're right. It's an area we have discussed a number of times previously. It's, obviously there are studios out there, we already work with them, who have already had to price this in because their business models involves having to hire talent from outside the EU. So they're already painfully familiar with these. And what's the big change for them is that they're going to suddenly have to start paying for these if they want to continue to hire for EU nationals as well. But for any studio who's operated only needing to hire EU and British nationals, there is going to be a bunch of costs involved. So the government fees break down into a couple of different categories. I'll give you the broad figures. So first up, you're going to have to pay for something called a certificate of sponsorship. If an individual wants to get a skilled worker visa, they're going to have a certificate of sponsorship. It's that when we talk about having an offer of employment from a licensed sponsor, that sponsorship is this certificate. That fee, it's actually probably the cheapest of all, and that comes in at just shy of £200. The real sting is what's called the immigration skills charge, introduced in 2017. It's a fee that is paid for the length of time that the individual is going to be working in the UK, so for up to 5 years. The amount you pay depends on whether you're a small company or whether you're a medium or large company. If you're a medium or large company, which a lot of studios are, obviously there are small studios out there as well, but if you're a medium or large studio, then you're going to be paying £1,000 a year to sponsor an individual. So that would be, typically people sponsor individuals for 5 years, which is the maximum permitted. So you're then looking at £5,000. If you're a small studio, it costs you about £360 a year. So you're actually looking at £1,800 instead. So depending on your size, you're either looking at £5,000 or £1,800 in terms of the immigration skills charge that you have to pay. And the most unfortunate part is that those two fees, you can't recoup them from the employee. The Home Office says as much, you're not allowed to do that. To secure the visa, the individual is also going to have to pay a visa application fee themselves. So that when they go and give their biometric information at a visa application centre, send off their documents, send off their passport, and it comes back with a sticker that allows them to enter the UK. That visa fee itself is about £900 for a 5-year visa. And then the other thing that they have to pay is something called the immigration health surcharge, which is an amount of money that an individual has to pay based again on the length of time they're coming to the UK. So if it's 5 years, it'll be the maximum amount. And they have to pay £624 a year. And what they do by paying that, it gives them access to the NHS in the same way as a British national would have. So what does that look like? If we flesh that out a little bit. So if you want to hire a developer from Spain for 5 years and you're a large studio, if that individual doesn't have any family, if it's just them on their own, then you're looking at just north of £9,000 in government fees. If the individual does have family members, a couple of those fees I've just touched on will also have to be paid for the family members. So if they had a spouse and if they had a child, for example, and the spouse and the child would also need visas, you're looking at the visa fee times 3, and you're looking at the health surcharge times 3. So you're looking there at a further £11,000. So you're looking at getting close then to, £17,000, or just over £17,000 for that family group. Now, one of the questions that my clients have to ask themselves is, which of these things are we going to pay for? As I said, you've got to pay for the cause, you've got to pay for the immigration skills charge. Are you going to offer any sort of financial assistance with the visa application fees? Because that's a substantial amount for anyone to pay, but it's also a substantial amount for a studio to outlay. So there's no escaping it. Those are the fees involved, and they will be the fees involved for the foreseeable future. Of course, that is a very big cost burden for business to carry. Who knows what the developments will be down the line if the government listens and reduces them? I don't know. It's perhaps not the most likely, because it's a really easy way for the government to make money. And, no one complains about people having to pay too much money for visas in the same way that perhaps if their income tax goes up.
It's not at the top of the reasons why people get re-elected, I suppose, is it?
No.
These people aren't in this country to begin with, so they're not going to complain, are they, I suppose? So.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting, that, because that was going to be one of the questions I was going to ask next, really, is that you've probably got your ear closer to the ground, so to speak, with anything that is coming down the sort of pipeline. But there's nothing to suggest any great positivity then yet around the government thinking, well, do you know what, this is going to cause a lot of problems. We're getting a lot of grief from businesses. We might have to start waiving some of these charges just to keep the wheels of industry moving. There's no chat about that in the background.
No, and it's a really difficult situation, really, because if it weren't for the pandemic, it probably would be a much louder call from business. But at the moment, businesses we work with, they've got bigger problems right now than this. Perhaps stay as diplomatic as I can, but perhaps there's an attitude on the side of the government to say, well, look, if you're struggling as a business right now, we get it. It's because of COVID. It's not because of Brexit. To do so would be to admit that this was a cost of Brexit, unfortunately. There isn't a loud conversation about that at the moment.
So I would imagine it's a very hot potato as well, isn't it? Because if they start to kind of water down the immigration rules and the immigration laws, then that was obviously a very hot topic, wasn't it, during it? And certainly, whichever side of the fence you fall on, it was definitely a key reason why people voted for Brexit, wasn't it, I think, or against Brexit. So maybe with a period of cooling off, it might be something that starts to take place in a couple of years' time, but nothing immediate then. No reason for people to get excited just yet.
Not on the fees front, although perhaps now's the time to talk about it. There is a future development that we do expect, which is good news. We don't talk about it much at the moment because it's all still on paper, but the government has committed to introducing a non-sponsored route for highly skilled workers, sort of like a monthly quota/lottery system, really. It's going to be part of the points-based system. They deliberately didn't introduce it at the start of the period, so from January this year, essentially because they wanted to see how the new system bedded in. But they have committed to introduce it. They've not said when they're going to introduce it, but they have committed to introduce it at some point. And what that would mean is, obviously, the studio wouldn't have to outlay all of these government fees to sponsor the employee. Instead, you could then be looking to potentially recruit somebody who has one of these highly skilled worker visas. The way they qualify for it will be based on what sort of qualifications have they got any previous UK experience, what's previously been their salary, and are they working potentially in shortage occupations. As I say, we don't have the full details, we just know what the intention is. And maybe one of the consequences of things being very difficult in this sphere for a short time is that maybe the government commits to bringing that forward sooner. It is something on the horizon. We know for definite that the graduate visa is happening. This highly skilled worker visa will happen when it happens. We don't have a date for when it will, but it would be good.
I mean, to be honest, let's focus on the good news. I like that one, especially with we've got the pandemic in the background as we speak. So I'm all for people talking up good news rather than bad news at the moment. But at least that's something to hope for. That final thing that you mentioned there, then, is that something that, say, I don't know, they have in places like Australia and these places that are touted as having these fantastic immigration systems? Do they have these little windows of opportunity, or not? Is it a thing that exists that they're borrowing, or is it something new that the government have come up with?
It's modelled on a similar system that operates in Australia. Our practice leader in Sheffield is actually originally from one of our Australian offices, so I'm not going to risk incurring her wrath by saying exactly how similar they are. But, we do like to base things on the Australian system. Without going too much into the history of it, this isn't the first time we've had a points-based system. The current system we have at the moment is technically a points-based system. It isn't in practice, but it's technically, it was when it was first introduced back in 2009, because the then Labour government got very excited and said, let's copy the Australian system. So, it is similar to other schemes in Australia. If it works well, will be fantastic. We don't envisage huge numbers. It's going to be hundreds, thousands rather than tens of thousands who are going to be able to qualify under this scheme. It will be useful.
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea, because I think certainly the more balanced views and the more balanced opinions of Brexit, and I know that everyone's entitled to be however unbalanced they want to be on that issue. It's not something that I would ever sort of argue with people about to some degree, but I think the more balanced view of it was that immigration did need to be looked at and did need to be kind of managed in a different and maybe in a better way. And it sounds like that's a more kind of a sort of halfway house, isn't it, or a balanced way of making sure we can get the skilled workers in, not just for games, but whether it's for medical and for health professions and all that kind of thing. No matter how blinkered you want to be about it, then we're all aware that we need some level of immigration going on. So it's good that things might change over time.
Like you say, wherever you stand on the spectrum of opinion about Brexit itself, it's undeniable that as a result of it, the UK government now does have complete control over immigration in a way that it hasn't previously. And as you say, if that leads to sensible policy, then I'm all for that.
Sensible policy. That's something we'll not get into, I don't think.
So for studios, then obviously we don't know exactly how it's going to work or if it's definitely coming. But the highly skilled worker visa, then, in sort of practical layman's terms, will that generally only be open to people of quite seniority, sort of like head of engineering or sort of seniors or leads?
To steal the government's advertising for it, it'll be for the brightest and best. So, it won't necessarily be for your entry-level ones. It will be for folks who've got a proven track record of success already, really. But that's still welcome because, as you say, it alleviates the need to fork out these costs and go through the sponsorship process for them.
The good thing about that as well is I can only assume that would be applicable not just to EU citizens, people from all over the world. So that would be better than the system that's in place for companies that want to hire in, whether it's Russians and people from the Middle East or people from India and places like that typically we've kind of struggled in many ways because they have always come with huge costs, haven't they? So that might be a better way of getting global talent rather than just EU talent as well into the system.
Absolutely. Yeah, as I say, the whole raison d'etre sort of this is that there is now no longer a distinction between non-EU and EU nationals. So like you say, things have got easier if you're from outside the EU and harder if you're from inside the EU, in short.
Let's hope they bring that forward as soon as they feel politically it's something they can handle and get to grips with. Right, so I think we're getting towards the final question. This is a good one. On the face of it, we've looked at the costs of it, and I think with my kind of, if you like, back of a fag packet calculations, it's going to cost you getting on for 10 grand to hire in an individual who's not got massively complicated kind of situation. Anytime you start ramping that up to spouses and dependents, we're probably talking more like 20 grand by the time you've sort of gone through the ins and outs. But so the cost side of things is, I do want to be kind of fairly clear about that without saying to people that's what it's definitely going to cost. But I think if they have a reasonable idea, then that's not far away. The other side of this, though, I think, is that I've heard you go through that example a few times now in the webinars and stuff that we've done. And I said this last week, that every time I hear it, I expect it to kind of get more clear, more easy to understand. But it just is a very complicated process, isn't it? So one thing I was going to say is, from your side of things, how easy do you think it's going to be for studios to be processing these applications if they've not done it before, or if they've not got manpower that's set aside to do it? Do you think it's going to create problems for them? And I'm not asking you to do a sales pitch here. it sounds quite difficult. It's not something I would want to tackle and try and get right. So am I right in thinking pretty tough?
It's a fair point. So, yeah, I'll try and avoid my salesman pitch. But the government's intention is they recognise that they're suddenly imposing burdens and administrative work on businesses that have never had previously had to do it if they want to continue in the way that they work. And so the rhetoric around it is to have made it simple enough to be able to do it yourself. But I'd love to say that was true. If it was, however, I wouldn't be in a job. The system hasn't, other than the tweaks that we've talked about to make it a little bit easier, the system hasn't dramatically changed. It is an onerous burden. So not only do you have to, fork out these fees, once you agree to sponsor somebody, you're effectively agreeing to be immigration compliant on behalf of the Home Office for that individual. So you're agreeing to notify the Home Office if that individual moves to a different work location, or you're going to notify them if their salary changes, or you're going to notify them if their job role changes. You're going to make sure you tell the Home Office if they take unpaid leave for more than 4 weeks. You're going to make sure that you keep designated records on file for them. So you're going to make sure that you keep all of their pay slips. You're going to keep their contact details up to date. So the studios may already have a great HR function already doing this, and you can adapt that, and that's fine. Like you say, if you've got the manpower, but it is onerous. As a result, that's why we exist.
And it also looks like it's the sort of thing that it can be tricky to get it right. And if you get it wrong, assuming that it slows down the whole process, you get your application kicked back, is there a chance that you lose any money that you've invested so far into that process? Does it just grind slowly if you get it wrong?
Yeah, I mean, that's a reasonable medium case scenario. The absolute worst case scenario, if you get it really badly wrong and you don't get the right visa type for somebody, you then have somebody illegally working for you if they don't have the right visa type. You hire someone in and you think they've got the right permission and it turns out they didn't. You can even face a civil penalty of up to 20 grand for illegal working. That's the absolute worst case scenario, and you could also lose your license if you have one. But yeah, you're right. If you do it yourself and the right documents aren't submitted with the visa application, then the application is going to be rejected. You'll get some of your fees back, the health charge and the skills charge back, but you're not going to get the visa fees back. So those will have to be paid again if it's refused. And yeah, not only do you not have the person with the visa able to start work when you need them to start work yesterday, you have to then do the whole process again and fork out money again. Studios that have got the manpower, yeah, they could have a go at doing it themselves for sure. No doubt there are studios out there that do that. But the ones I work with are always incredibly thankful that they know they can say, just ask me to do it, and that's fine. That was
going to be my question next, was going to be, have you ever had any studios that have kind of done it once with you guys and then said, you know what, this is a doddle list, we're not going to bother with Lawrence and the Fragomen guys anymore?
You know what? Thankfully not. Often it's the reverse, I have to say. Often businesses, not just studios, these things affect all businesses in the UK, but often what happens is people will come to us maybe after things have gone wrong. So they tried to do it themselves, the visa got rejected or the license application wasn't approved. And then they're just like, oh, you know what, I'm not going to go through this pain again. I'm going to engage an expert to do it for us.
No, I can see why, because I think from what I'm understanding, and again, I'm never going to claim to be an expert in this area by any stretch, but it's not as if it's like a passport application where you kind of send it, you get it together, you can take it to the post office and ask them to check it for you and make sure it's all right. And even if you do send one in, then, and you get it wrong, then they usually spit it back to you and you can have another go, can't you? Whereas this sounds like a lot of the fees go down the Swanee. When you get it wrong, it's not like they just send it back and say, well, yeah, we'll keep your money, here's the paperwork, have another go, and it stays there. You've got to almost go back to the beginning by the side of it, and reapply with the fees again. That is tough.
Just a couple final questions then, which I can kind of roll into one. So obviously Ian's already mentioned that Aardvark and Fragomen have been working together, specifically you two have been working together to do a series of webinars for studios, both in the UK and EU, if they were interested as well. So yeah, one, what's some common questions you've had from studios, or do they sort of marry up with the questions that we've been asking? And sort of two, more for you, Ian, I suppose. So how is Aardvark and Fragomen working together to assist studios going forward?
The questions you guys have asked have been very similar to the ones we get on the webinars, and the questions are predominantly, okay, is this really the only visa type option? Oh, wow, okay, is that, how much is it going to cost? And how do refunds work if it goes wrong? The main one is, what can we do to prepare? What do we need to do to get a license? Those are the themes that we've been coming across. It's really studios just getting to grips with the issues that we've just been talking about now.
The one that's kind of addressed to me then, James, how are we working together? The only thing I would say is that just to give a tiny bit of background on why before I talk about the how, but one thing that we undertook here at Aardvark is some research into the number of placements and the type of placements that we've made into the games industry in the last sort of 2 or 3 years. And we found out that around about 20 to 25% of the placements that we've made with companies would, under the new restrictions and under the new sort of Brexit guidelines, would have involved a visa and all the costs and time implications that occurs. So that's why we pushed ahead with conversations with Lawrence and Fragomen, just to try and give any studios that felt that they would need to carry on with the practice of hiring EU staff or EU companies that are hiring UK staff for that matter. For those that need to carry on, we wanted to give them an option of getting it right or getting some advice, and hence the reason for the hookup. So in very short sort of answer then, the way that we're working with Fragomen is that any studios that want to get the advice, if they want to give me a shout or if they want to hook up with us, well, then we will facilitate a conversation with Fragomen. And what Lawrence and the guys there have offered is that they're happy to do an initial sort of consultation where companies can talk through their own individual, whether it's plans, whether it's queries or fears maybe, and then that will not be sort of in build, if you like, so they can open up and have a chat to maybe an expert, get some initial advice, and then decide what they want to do going forward. So hopefully that gives people a little bit of a cushion to get things right at the start.
Thank you very much for listening to the Aardvark Swift podcast. This episode was recorded, hosted, produced, and edited by me, Jimmy Bowers. If you have any comments or suggestions for the podcast, or if you'd like to feature on a future episode, please email info@aswift.com. Special thanks go out to Lawrence K. Thomas and Ian Goodall for spending time with me. So this will actually be my final episode of the Aardvark Swift podcast as host. I just want to thank everyone that's listened over the last year, regardless of when you jumped on board. It's been a fantastic experience being able to speak to so many talented people throughout the industry, and I can't wait to listen to how the podcast evolves going forward. The music in this episode is from Incompetech by Kevin MacLeod. To learn more, you can visit incompetech.com.